Russell thought he had his retirement completely figured out. One withdrawal, one check, the house paid off. He was 66, retired 2 years, and finally about to be debt-free by Friday afternoon. So he called his brokerage and asked to withdraw $200,000. He wanted to erase his mortgage in a single, satisfying payment. The money moved, the mortgage cleared, and Russell felt lighter than he had in years. Then, the following April, his tax preparer called with a very different number. Russell had expected to owe maybe $24,000 on that big withdrawal. Instead, the final bill came to just under $50,000. Same withdrawal, same account, yet more than double the tax he had planned for. He didn't earn more. He didn't cheat. He simply picked the wrong year to do it. Today, we break down exactly how one withdrawal quietly doubles into a $50,000 mistake. Here's what nobody tells you about taking one very large retirement withdrawal. The tax you pay is almost never just the tax on the withdrawal itself. One big withdrawal does not sit quietly inside its own little tax bracket. It reaches sideways and drags all of your other income into higher taxes with it. Your Social Security, your Medicare premiums, and your capital gains all get pulled in. Most people think a withdrawal is taxed once, at one single simple rate. In reality, a single large withdrawal can quietly trigger 4 or 5 separate taxes. Each one is small on its own, but stacked together, they quickly become brutal. This is the trap that turns a planned $24,000 into a painful $50,000. And it hits hardest on exactly the people who save the most for retirement. The retirees with full traditional accounts are the most exposed of everyone, because every dollar in a traditional account is a dollar you have not yet taxed. The government has patiently waited decades to finally collect on that balance. And a giant one-year withdrawal is precisely the moment when they collect the most. Before you dismiss all of this, hear this clearly. It is almost entirely avoidable. The mistake isn't the withdrawal, it's the timing. And here's what the data shows. Let's keep this fair and look at 2 retirees standing side by side. Meet Russell, 66, and his neighbor Glenn, 65, living on the very same street. Both men retired with almost identical savings and very nearly identical yearly incomes. Both had roughly $900,000 sitting in a traditional retirement account. Both collected the same Social Security, about $48,000 a year combined. Both also had a small pension worth roughly $12,000 each and every year. And both still owed about $180,000 on their homes. Same age, same savings, same income, same mortgage, truly identical on paper. In a normal year, both couples sat comfortably down inside the 12% bracket. Their taxable income stayed low, and most of their Social Security went completely untaxed. Then both men decided, in the exact same year, to finally pay off the house. This is where 2 identical retirements split into 2 very different outcomes. Russell chose the fast way, pull it all out at once, and simply be done. He withdrew $200,000 from his traditional IRA in one single year. Enough to clear the whole mortgage and cover the taxes he simply assumed he'd owe. In his mind, that money would be taxed gently at his usual 12%. 12% of $200,000 is $24,000, he figured. Simple math. But that simple math quietly ignored where the withdrawal actually landed on his return. Stacked on top of his other income, that $200,000 climbed straight up the brackets. The first thin slice merely filled up what was left of his 12% bracket. The next, much larger slice jumped straight up into the 22% bracket. And the very top of it crossed cleanly into the 24% bracket entirely. So the withdrawal was never taxed at 12, it was taxed climbing steadily upward. Just on the brackets alone, the federal bill was already near $40,000. But brackets were only the very first of several separate taxes now waking up. Now let's turn and look at Glenn, who wanted the exact same end result. Glenn also wanted his $180,000 mortgage gone completely and for good. But Glenn asked one more careful question before he even touched the account. He asked what the withdrawal would quietly do to everything else on his tax return. So instead of one giant withdrawal, Glenn spread it across 4 separate calendar years. About $45,000 each year, deliberately staying inside his lower bracket. He kept renting money from the bank a little longer, entirely on purpose. He paid a bit of extra mortgage interest to avoid a far, far bigger tax. 4 smaller withdrawals kept Glenn's income safely under every dangerous threshold. Same $900,000, same mortgage goal, yet a wildly different final tax bill. Glenn paid roughly 12%, exactly as he expected, spread across those 4 years. Russell, meanwhile, paid nearly $50,000 in a single, very painful April. The difference was never the amount withdrawn. It was how many years it touched. Russell had watched friends carry mortgages into their 80s, and he quietly hated that idea. To him, a fully paid-off house meant safety, freedom, and one less monthly worry. Glenn felt exactly the same strong pull toward freedom, but he paused to do arithmetic. Both men were right that a debt-free retirement feels wonderful and deeply reassuring. The disagreement was never really about the goal, it was purely about the method. Russell measured success by the calendar. Gone by Friday felt like a real victory. Glenn measured success by the tax return. Lowest lifetime tax felt like the real win. One man optimized for speed and relief, the other optimized quietly for total cost. Remember, both men started that year comfortably inside the 12% tax bracket. That low bracket was a rare and valuable gift, and only one of them protected it. A retiree's low-income years are a narrow, precious, and very easily wasted window. Spend that window wisely, and the tax savings can genuinely stretch into 6 figures. Waste that same window with one giant withdrawal, and it slams firmly shut for good. Keep that mental image close as we walk through each tax, one careful dollar at a time. Let's slow right down and watch each separate tax wake up, one at a time. Start with the brackets, because that's the one tax that everyone actually expects. In 2026, a married couple pays 10% on income up to about $25,000. Then 12% runs all the way up to roughly $100,000 of taxable income. Above that, the rate jumps to 22%, then 24% higher up the ladder. Russell's normal income had already used up most of his lowest tax brackets. His Social Security and pension had already filled the 10 and 12% space. So his $200,000 withdrawal started near the top of the 12% bracket. Almost none of it enjoyed that friendly 12% rate he had imagined. Most of the withdrawal was taxed at 22 and a solid chunk at 24. Run the numbers, and the bracket tax alone lands very close to $40,000. That's already $16,000 more than the $24,000 he had budgeted for. And remember, we have not even touched a single one of the other taxes yet. Here's the tax almost nobody sees coming, the infamous Social Security tax torpedo. Most people believe their Social Security benefit is theirs, and mostly stays tax-free. In a low-income year, that's often true. Very little of it is actually taxed. But Social Security taxation depends entirely on something called your provisional income. Provisional income is your other income plus 1/2 of your Social Security benefit. As that number rises, more of your benefit becomes taxable, all the way up to 85%. For a married couple, the real danger zone begins right around $32,000. Above $44,000 of provisional income, the maximum 85% fully kicks in. Those thresholds were set decades ago and have never once been adjusted for inflation. So almost any large withdrawal blows straight past those frozen thresholds instantly. Before his withdrawal, only a small slice of Russell's benefits had been taxable. After it, a full 85% of his Social Security suddenly became taxable income. That's roughly $40,000 of benefits suddenly dragged out and exposed to tax. Benefits he had already earned, already counted on, now yanked straight onto the return. Here's what actually happens. The withdrawal did not just get taxed all on its own. It reached over and quietly made his Social Security taxable, too. That single torpedo added several thousand more dollars of tax he never once budgeted for. This is why one extra dollar of income can quietly cost far more than $1. In the phase-in zone, each dollar can add up to $1.85 of taxable income. Now the third tax, and this sneaky one hides quietly for 2 full years. It's called IRMA, the income-related monthly adjustment amount attached to your Medicare. Most people simply think Medicare premiums are the same for absolutely everyone. They're not. Above certain income levels, both your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums jump upward. In 2026, that surcharge starts above $218,000 for a couple. Russell's giant withdrawal shoved his income far, far past that surcharge line. And IRMA is a hard cliff, not a gentle ramp. $1 over triggers everything. The standard Part B premium in 2026 is about $203 monthly. In a high-income year, that same premium can climb toward $500 or $600 monthly. For both spouses, across an entire year, that adds up to thousands in extra premiums. Here's the truly cruel part. Irma looks back at your income from 2 years earlier. So Russell's 2026 withdrawal quietly set his Medicare premiums all the way out in 2028. He had completely forgotten about it by the time those higher bills finally arrived. A total surprise surcharge triggered entirely by a decision he had made 2 years earlier. Most people never once connect the withdrawal to that higher Medicare bill at all. The fourth tax is the one that quietly punishes your very best investing. Russell had also planned to sell some stock that he'd patiently held for years. About $20,000 of long-term capital gains, taxed gently, he safely assumed. In a genuinely low-income year, those gains can actually be taxed at 0%. Yes, 0. The long-term capital gains rate has a genuine, real zero bracket. In 2026, a couple keeps that zero rate up to about $99,000 of income. But that zero bracket sits stacked directly on top of your ordinary income first. Russell's huge withdrawal completely filled that entire zero bracket with ordinary income first. So his capital gains got shoved right up into the 15% tax rate instead. Gains that could have been completely tax-free now quietly cost him a full 15%. That is $3,000 more of tax created purely by simple bad timing. Same stock, same gain, taxed at 0 for Glenn, but 15% for Russell. The fifth hit isn't even a new tax. It's a valuable deduction that simply vanishes. For 2026, seniors age 65 and older get a special bonus tax deduction. It is worth up to a full $12,000 for a married couple. But that generous bonus deduction steadily phases out as your yearly income climbs. For a couple, it starts shrinking above $150,000 of income, and it disappears entirely somewhere right around $250,000. Russell's withdrawal launched his income right past that deduction's vanishing point. So he lost a $12,000 deduction that he otherwise would have easily kept. Losing a deduction inside a high bracket quietly adds thousands more dollars in tax. Glenn, by staying nicely low, kept every single dollar of that senior deduction. There is also one more lurking tax reserved for the very highest income retirees. It's the net investment income tax, an extra 3.8% surcharge. It quietly hits your investment income once your total income crosses $250,000. Like the Social Security thresholds, that line has also never been indexed for inflation. A big enough withdrawal can drag even your investment income into that extra surtax too. So let's carefully add up what that one single withdrawal really cost Russell. Bracket tax on the withdrawal itself, very nearly $40,000 right there. Extra tax from his Social Security torpedo, several more $1,000s piled on top. Capital gains bumped from 0 up to 15%, about $3,000 more. The lost senior deduction, another few $1,000s stacked right on top. Then add the Medicare surcharge quietly waiting to ambush him out in 2028. The federal damage alone lands right around a full $50,000. And that's all before his own state takes its separate cut of the same withdrawal. Russell budgeted $24,000. Reality instead billed him nearly $50,000. Not because he did anything at all wrong with the money itself, but because he ran an entire decade's worth of income through one single year. Now here's the part that makes the timing matter even more than you'd think. Traditional accounts do not stay optional forever. Eventually the government forces the withdrawals. They're called required minimum distributions, and they now begin at age 73. At that point, you absolutely must withdraw a set amount every single year. Miss it, and the penalty is a steep 25% of whatever you skipped. Fix it quickly enough, though, and that harsh penalty can drop down to 10%. Those forced withdrawals stack right on top of everything else you're already earning. So the retirees who never planned end up with huge mandatory income much later. Every dollar Russell left untouched will eventually be forced right out of the account anyway. The question was never whether he'd pay tax. It was when and how fast. Most people simply wait, do nothing, and let one giant year decide it all for them. The smart move is to control the timing before the timing takes control of you. So why do careful, intelligent retirees walk straight into this exact trap anyway? Because paying off a mortgage feels responsible, safe, and deeply emotionally satisfying. Debt genuinely feels like danger, and erasing all of it feels like winning. Most people optimize for the feeling of being debt-free, never for the actual tax math. The withdrawal looks like just one clean decision, not 5 separate hidden taxes. Nobody standing at the bank ever warns you about your Social Security or Medicare. The teller simply processes the withdrawal. The whole cascade shows up months later. By then, the money is already spent, and the entire tax year is firmly closed. There is simply no undo button on a withdrawal once December 31st passes. That's exactly what makes this particular mistake so permanent and so very expensive. Picture Glenn's whole plan as a calendar instead of one single giant check. Year 1, $45,000. Then year 2, another calm $45,000. Year 3 and year 4, exactly the same until the whole mortgage was gone. Each year, his income stayed calmly under every single threshold that actually mattered. His Social Security stayed mostly untaxed, and his Medicare premiums never once spiked. His capital gains comfortably stayed inside the 0% bracket the entire time, and he kept his full senior deduction every single year without any loss. Same exact destination as Russell, but a small fraction of the tax to get there. Let's put real 2026 numbers on Russell's return, one careful step at a time. His pension and half his benefits already reached about $40,000 of taxable income. That left only $60,000 of room inside his 12% bracket. His $200,000 withdrawal filled that room and then kept right on climbing. $140,000 of it spilled up into the 22 and 24 brackets. The marginal rate on his very last withdrawal dollars was more than double his plan. This is the quiet cost of stacking one enormous number on top of everything else. Let's make the Social Security torpedo painfully concrete with Russell's own real figures. His combined benefit was $48,000, a meaningful part of his yearly income. In a calm year, barely any of that $48,000 would ever be taxed. The withdrawal pushed his provisional income far past the $44,000 ceiling instantly. So the taxable share of his benefits jumped straight to the full 85%. Roughly $40,000 of benefits landed on the return as fresh taxable income. At his new bracket, that torpedo alone cost him around $9,000 extra dollars. $9,000 of tax on money he had already earned many decades ago. There's an even crueler version of this trap that quietly ambushes surviving spouses. Tax professionals grimly call it the widow's penalty, and it is brutally common. When one spouse passes, the survivor usually files as a single taxpayer the next year. Single tax brackets are far narrower, and the single thresholds sit far lower. The same income that fit a married return suddenly overflows a single one entirely. A surviving spouse can face higher taxes on noticeably less total income. A large forced withdrawal in that first single year can be genuinely devastating. Smoothing income early helps quietly protect the spouse who may one day file a loan. Let's circle back to Medicare, because IRMA has multiple steadily rising tiers. The surcharge isn't one flat fee. It climbs across 5 separate income brackets. The higher your income climbs, the higher your monthly Medicare premium tier becomes. At the very top tier, Part B alone can approach $700 monthly. A single oversized withdrawal can vault a couple up several premium tiers at once. And it lasts a full 12 months before your income can finally reset it. One single year of high income buys you an entire year of punishing premiums. The capital gains bump truly deserves one more careful, concrete look. Long-term gains always stack on top of your ordinary income, never underneath it. So your ordinary income is what actually decides which gains rate you pay. Fill that low space with a big withdrawal, and your gains lose the 0 rate. Glenn kept his gains in the 0 bracket simply by keeping his income low. Russell converted his own 0 rate gift straight into a 15% bill. Now remember, everything so far has been only the federal side of this story. Most states tax retirement withdrawals as ordinary income right alongside the federal government. In a higher tax state, that quietly adds several $1,000s more to the damage. A handful of kinder states exempt some or all retirement income entirely. But Russell's own state took its full cut, stacked right on top of everything else. The same smoothing that lowers your federal tax usually lowers your state tax too. So what could Russell have actually done differently here, in very plain terms? First, he could have simply split the withdrawal across several lower income years. Second, he could have converted small amounts to a Roth in his calmest years. A Roth conversion pays some tax now, but future growth then comes out completely tax-free. And Roth accounts never force any required distributions during the owner's own lifetime. Done gradually, those conversions quietly shrink the giant forced withdrawals waiting later. Third, he could have kept part of the mortgage and simply paid it slowly. The mortgage interest he'd have saved was tiny next to the tax the rush created. Let's replay this whole thing one final time, side by side and perfectly clearly. Russell, one single year, $200,000 out, and nearly $50,000 in tax. Glenn, 4 calm years, the exact same total out, but a small fraction in tax. Identical savings, identical goal, wildly different results from the timing alone. That gap wasn't luck or loopholes, it was one careful question, asked early enough. Here's the counterintuitive truth that almost nobody ever explains to you clearly. You were never really taxed on that withdrawal all by itself at all. You were taxed on everything the withdrawal happened to touch on its way up. The withdrawal itself was just the trigger. The real damage spread everywhere else. Think of your income for 1 year as a single, steadily rising tide. Push it way up with one big withdrawal, and suddenly everything floods at once. Your benefits, your premiums, your gains, your deductions, everyone moves together. That's exactly why the tax code doesn't ever really punish big accounts. It punishes big years. A $1 million account withdrawn slowly and calmly can be remarkably tax-friendly. That very same account withdrawn in one panic can quickly become a total disaster. So the real skill in retirement isn't the earning, it's the careful smoothing. Spreading your income across many calm years instead of one single violent spike. This is exactly what wealthy families quietly do with their advisors, every single year. They deliberately fill up the low brackets on purpose and stop just before the cliffs. They convert small amounts to Roth accounts during their very lowest income years. They withdraw a little early on purpose before required distributions ever force their hand. None of this ever requires more money. It only requires far better timing. Here's what nobody tells you about the truly wealthy and how they handle taxes. They rarely ever pay less simply because they happen to earn less that year. They pay less because they never once let any single year grow too big. Russell had every single one of those same tools freely available to him. He simply reached out and used them all at once, in one single year. The tragedy here isn't that he paid tax. Everyone eventually pays their tax. The real tragedy is he paid double, for a result he could have had cheaply. Here's another way the wealthy quietly think about every single tax year. They treat each low-income year as valuable, unused tax space just waiting to be filled. Empty low brackets, left completely unused, simply vanish at the end of December. You can never go back later and reclaim last year's cheap, unused tax room. So they fill that space deliberately, a little at a time, year after year. It honestly feels almost too slow and too boring to be a real strategy. But boring, repeated patiently for a decade, quietly beats one dramatic and costly year. The wealthy rarely rush their taxes. They schedule them calmly and fully on purpose. So before you ever make one big withdrawal, ask Glenn's simple question first. Not just how much do I need, but truly, what will this whole thing touch? What happens to my Social Security, my Medicare, my gains, and my deductions? Run the numbers across several years, not just the single year in front of you. If a large withdrawal truly is unavoidable, see if you can carefully split it. 2 smaller withdrawal years almost always beat one single, enormous, painful one. And if you're still years away from required withdrawals, start your planning right now. The lowest income years of your retirement are quietly your very best tax opportunities. Don't waste them just sitting and waiting for the government to force your hand. This was never really about fear. It's about keeping money that is already yours. Make the decision that matches your reality, not somebody else's polished sales pitch. If a big expense is coming, start planning for it a few full years ahead. Pull a little extra in your low years to quietly prepare for the big one. That way, the eventual purchase never forces one single enormous taxable spike. Talk with a tax professional before and never after you move a large sum. A single planning conversation in advance can quietly save you tens of thousands. The most expensive tax advice is always the advice that you get far too late. Small, calm, informed decisions today protect the whole retirement you already worked for. If this helped you finally see the hidden math, subscribe to Coach Nora Money. Hit the notification bell so the next money trap never once catches you off guard. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day. Because your retirement isn't one big withdrawal. Don't let one big year tax the rest.